So we do have a few people already. We're going to admit them. So welcome
Yes.
everybody to Literary Thursdays. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. So thank you for joining us, and you're welcome to type in the chat where you're listening from. So right now I'm in Queens Village, Queens. Yeah, sometimes you get people from all over New York and outside of New York and outside of America tuning in. So it's really interesting.
Yes, very much so. The person who was here before is in Canada.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Oh, let's see. I think someone said, "Oh, that's an interesting place. Holland Patent, New York. I didn't know about that city."
Well, welcome.
Yes, welcome. I have to look that up. I really didn't know. Oh, okay. That's a real city. Very nice. That's good. Yeah, near Utica, New York. Very nice. The more people are joining us, which is normal. Usually, as we do the program, more and more people join.
Yes.
All right, so it is around 6:03. So
Yes.
Yes.
welcome everyone, and I think Indira volunteered to start us off, so that should be fun.
Okay, sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for another Literary Thursdays tonight. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. My name is Indira Mukherjee. I'm the Assistant Manager, Information Access Services here at Central Library. Before my colleague Caspar Jurecki introduces tonight's author, I would like to provide you with some Queen's Public Library announcement. Halloween is coming soon. It's time to make some spooky crafts, watch scary movies, hear ghost stories, and wear your favorite costume. And you can do all of that and more at the library. Visit the QPL calendar on our website to learn about all of our Halloween programs. Now, over to Casper.
All right, thank you, Indira, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We're in for a treat. We have a great author joining us today. Dr. Janan Nekli is an Egyptian-born Lebanese-American psychologist whose life journey has taken her across 4 continents. Political and economic upheaval in her native Egypt led her to live in Switzerland, Lebanon, and France before immigrating to the United States, where she established her home and professional practice in Manhattan. Her international upbringing and diverse life experiences have immersed her in multicultural environments and have given her multilingual fluency, including English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and an extensive world view. A licensed psychologist in New York and Connecticut with nearly 30 years of clinical experience. Dr. Neckley has served as Director of Therapeutics at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center and taught the graduate seminar Trauma, Theoretical and Clinical Perspectives at New York University. Dr. Neckley's clinical work focuses on anxiety, interpersonal relationships, and learning differences, Through a collaborative and supportive approach, she draws on her expertise to help individuals reach their personal and psychological goals. And of course, Dr. Neckley is the author of Finding Home from Cairo to New York, a memoir. So, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to learn about your story.
Thank you, Indira. Thank you, Casper. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here and welcome to all of you. As said, I'm Jeanette Nackley, author of Finding Home from Cairo to New York and licensed psychologist in New York and Connecticut. This evening, I would like also to welcome the audience. Thank you for being here and for joining me in my presentation. That includes my 5 grandchildren, Serena, Sierra, Samson, Laser, and Zara. And thank you for participating in the conversation that we'll have later on. But most of all, I would like to thank Queens Public Library for hosting this event and for inviting me to present my memoir to you. In my presentation, I will start by showing you and talking about how my memoir came about. Then I will outline the concept, the main concepts of the memoir and the themes that have emerged from the memoir. So, starting with how the memoir came about, some years ago, I realized that the events and the experience I was living were unusual, not exclusive, not unique, but significant. And they were unfolding with a lot of noise and change. So I started jotting down events and their dates. And slowly the list became longer and longer. And with technology, I use my cell phone to add the events. Years went by, and for family reasons, I moved from New York, where I had my private practice, and that was very successful, to Texas. I arrived in Texas. Soon after that, here comes COVID, restricting my social interaction. So I had significantly reduced my private practice to be in Texas. COVID significantly reduced my social interactions. And my daughter, my older daughter, Joelle, told me, Mom, why don't you write your memoir? I had my list. I thought, what not? Why not? The idea lingered on my mind, and I started writing. In my writing, I wanted to be candid, showed my vulnerability, and thoughtful about the way I described or explained certain events. I wanted the events to stand for themselves, not the words I used to describe them. So that was one of the things that was an ongoing quest on my mind. So I wrote for 5 years, and then I completed my memoir, and I decided to self-publish. I felt that self-publication was my way to go and to do it the way I wanted it to be. And here it is. And it is sold at Amazon and on all its platform. It's available at Queen's Library and at other libraries. And it's also available at bookstores, including Barnes and Noble. So here it is. And recently, I decided to translate my memoir into French, which was another endeavor. And it's very interesting. As the author, I found quite a difference between the French edition and the English edition. It resonated differently. The first, I would say, 40% of the memoir happened in French. Communication were in French, and the 60% were in English. So it gives a different flavor, at least for me it did. And the French memoir will be published in December of this year. Now, the important uh, concept of the memoir start with immigration. And I will preface by saying that no one that I've known leaves his or her home country without a valid reason, serious reason. For us, it was political unrest in Egypt at the time, and it was the takeover of all our assets by the regime at the time, the Egyptian regime at the time. Everything was taken, including my father's business, belongings, bank accounts, car, and even books. The doctoral dissertation of my grandfather and my uncle disappeared as well. So, given the circumstances, my parents decided to move. It took my mother forever to get what was called at the time an exit visa. And they decided, I was still a teenager, they decided to go to Switzerland. And Switzerland was welcoming immigrants to their land and opening possibilities of residence. So that was our first move. I stayed there a number of years and then got married. As soon as I got married, I moved to Beirut, Lebanon. Beirut, Lebanon was close enough to Egypt. It wasn't quite the same, but it had some flavor of Egypt. And it was very pleasant to be there. And then while we were there, civil war erupted. And then full-fledged war, multi-factor full-fledged war erupted. Having a toddler daughter, we didn't feel it was appropriate for her to grow up in such circumstances. Some people stayed. We decided to move and we went to France. France was known to us, and the language, we mastered the language, which was the home language, French. And we lived there. By then, home country had become a concept that kept on changing. Home was no longer the land of the ancestors, of the grandparents, but the place where we happened to be at that particular time. Very grateful to be there, but couldn't quite define it. Then finally, in the early 80s, for a number of reasons that would be too long, but that are related in the memoir, I moved to New York. New York's energy and mine at the time were a perfect match. I loved the city. I still do. It was my city, and I was so glad to have finally found my city, my home. Hence, I titled my memoir, Finding Home from Cairo to New York, and I had found it. The other important concept in my memoir, it's relationships, whether family relationships, romantic relationships, how to interact with relationships, the faulty ways, the coping ways, and also loss of relationships, whether loss occurred because of emotional reasons or physical reasons, and how to deal with that. Over here, I would not detail because it spreads throughout the memoir. and it takes a complex, very, at times, vulnerable turn that will let the reader go through. But something happened at that time too. I don't know exactly when, but given that my address had been changing, had been unreliable thus far until I got to New York, that people were unreliable, untrustworthy, seemed to be part of life. That was the way things were. And I became inadvertently vulnerable to such relationships. But that is one of the aftermath. The other theme, and I would say the leitmotif that is there in the memoir from the beginning to the end, is education. Education and leading to financial self-reliance. This is for everyone, particularly for the young people nowadays. Women, I would say, more than men, because I'm a woman and I want to support, I'm supporting everyone, but it's very important for young women to gain the self-reliance, the financial self-reliance through education. What do I mean by education? Education could be technical, artistic, academic, professional. Hopefully it's something that is fulfilling and leads to a framework to perceiving, thinking, and a gateway to self-reliance, and paves the way to greater choices and independence. So that is something that is very dear to me. Now I have introduced how the memoir came about, the main points of the memoir. I will now address the themes that emerged from the memoir. Hardship, life hardship, triggered or can trigger, for me, it triggered insight and awareness. Nietzsche says that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting. I'm also paraphrasing Kierkegaard, who says that life is lived looking forward, but is understood backward. So that was very much my case. Luckily, not so much along the way. I self-discovered myself. And I self-discovered myself in terms of resilience. I needed to have resilience to overcome. And I plowed along, continued, reinvented myself. And then I realized humbly that it's really a matter of perspective. A lot of effort, but a matter of perspective. What I was able to do later, I could have done earlier, because I was the same person. What I had gained was experience and hopefully some wisdom and some pragmatic approach to life. So this is really the themes that surfaced and that I still hold very dear in my life. Now, before I pass on to questions and conversation, I would like to give you a few takeaways. The first is belonging. Belonging is an innate, I would say, need that we all have, whether to a country, to a family, to a profession, but we all need to belong. And it may be all the above, all together, but we need to belong. And also, I wish that my experience by writing my memoir will resonate with all those who want to have their voice heard, who want to define themselves. I also wish that my memoir would be one of hope. If I could do it, so can you. You know, absolutely. I have no doubt. And uh, hope is the guiding light that reinforces resilience and helps us reach our goals. And in closing, I'm going to read a couple of lines from my memoir. We each have a path to follow. I hope that reading about my journey will encourage you to follow yours in your own way, at your own time and pace. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Queens Public Library.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great having you with us today. We're so excited. And I just want to remind everyone in the audience, you're welcome to type your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted. And we already have one comment, and they say, Bree says, love your necklace. So I also noticed your necklace earlier. It's really nice.
Thank you. My daughter gave it to me. It's a symbol of my book.
Very cute. Very good. So let me start off with the question. Your memoir touches on navigating different cultures. What were some of the biggest cultural shocks you experienced in your moves between Egypt, Europe, and the United States?
As I said, New York was far from a shock. It was a healing. The energy of, I'm repeating myself here, the energy of New York and mine at the time were a perfect match. I loved it. I continue loving it. I never lived anywhere longer in my life as I lived in New York. I would say other places did not felt to some extent comfortable, but I had the feeling that I had put a label on the place where I resided as home, but my home, my real home was somewhere else. Once I came to New York, that vanished. And I felt blessed in that way. So
Thank you so.
no
Go ahead.
shock in terms of New York, and no shock whatsoever. What I needed to have is flexibility, adaptation, deal with the weather in some places. In Egypt, the weather was always sunny and the sky was blue. So when it rained on an ongoing way, it was, you know, a discovery. In my childhood, when it rained, we were allowed to run into the courtyard from school, at the back of the school, and be under the rain because it was such an unusual event. So, yes, no shock.
Thank you so much. And I
You,
do agree with you the when you in your introduction when you said that like the COVID, changed everybody's. I think it interrupted everybody's life.
yes,
Everybody's, right? So
yes.
my question to you is, um, what was the moment that made you realize you needed to write this book? Like not just living in the story, instead share it with the world.
I think it was the convergence of events. Leaving my practice, and I love doing my psychology, my clinical work. So it was really my big passion, still is. Moving to a new place yet one more time. At the time, I think it was my 22nd time. So there was this moment, and then restriction of activity, professional activity, and restriction of social activity leads to reflection, to thinking. My daughter, who's also an author of a memoir, suggesting that why don't you write yours? And I had my list, and I said, why not? As a matter of fact, I felt relieved to put it out. I was no longer carrying it within. It was a release. It was outside of me. Um, I had done, I think, people may disagree, my best to be, as I've said earlier, candid and fair, but the events were the events. So I wrote it, and I haven't so far regretted it. And those who have read it share my opinion, even main characters in the book.
Great. You know, it's like your life is like your story, actually, I would say, like a lot of like reinvention, like a mother, a psychologist, an immigrant, a writer, all of this. Like, so how do you personally define resilience after like everything you have lived? Which life you liked the most?
Resilience demanded a two-way view. I had to focus on the immediate and focus on the solution. I didn't have the luxury of focusing on the problem. I would have drowned. So luckily, I did not. And also, within all that was happening, I cannot and will not forget that there were some exquisite, wonderful moments and very unique relationships, even if they didn't last or they didn't come out the way I wish they would. So it was a patchwork. And resilience came from adjusting that view. I had a goal in mind. My main goal was the protection of my two daughters and my education. Those were the top two. Uh, and I tried to be pragmatic. I wasn't always, but I tried very hard to be. So the resilience came through the I can do it. And luckily, I inherited the family's uh, will of steel. When I willed something, it would have been very hard to deter me from doing it. And I plowed along. And sometimes I looked at the long term goal and the short term possibility and approximated. But again, the two superseding factors were number one, my two daughters and my education.
Thank you. And if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, definitely. Come on. I can do it today. And you think you can't, or you don't think about it. And I would give her a wake up call, but I also would give her a hug. I would give her a big hug and say, you know, you can do it. move on. You know, the possibilities are there and they're multiple. In some ways, I I planned without planning. When I was in Switzerland, I took upon myself to study some American history. Why in the world did I study American history? I was 16, 17. I had no plans of coming to the States. The state was not in my geographic planning, but I studied some American history. Not enough, but enough to have an idea. So I was in some ways planning ahead even then. And I I find connections with her. There is still the ideal, the smiling, the yes, let's do it that is there and very much there. But at the time, there was the idea without the action. I was reserved, and also I was an only child to doting, loving, but relatively strict Catholic parents. So my behavior was a precondition. So here we are. No, I would give her a hug and say, come on, you can do it. And you did it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I was like writing a memoir, right? It means
Yes.
like deciding what to reveal and what to hold back, right? So, how did you navigate that vulnerability, both as a writer and as a psychologist aware of its power?
The psychologist part was perhaps the hardest, but because so far the psychologist's demeanor is not to reveal oneself. And I think it's a balancing act that the strictly non-revealing dates from the 19th century and the maybe even 18 and Freud and all of that. I think nowadays it's a little bit more revealing, but still not. So that part was originally difficult for me. Then it's by sharing my shortcomings that in some ways I felt comfortable sharing about the events that were happening. And then I looked at my manuscript and I said, there's nothing really that I am embarrassed about. There's nothing that I did that I feel ashamed of. Yes, early on with my exam, that was maybe the moment in time, and that may have been a trigger. Um, but shame came from taking on the burden of responsibility of what had happened to me that had not caused, but endured and suffered from. And once I realized it was not my lot of responsibility, there's a big sense of relief. Uh, you know, that's the way over time when I wrote it. And then there's also when you write and you write such personal, deep, emotional period of one's life, you're very invested in the writing. So it's as if you're in a competition. You see how you can win the competition, but you don't think about how am I going to win the competition. You're in the moment. You throw the ball. You don't think about, am I going to throw the ball or not? You just throw it. And with experience, you try to throw it right. So this is what happened. I was immersed in my writing, and then I read it. And I experienced what I've just said.
Thank you. And we do have a question from Rosalind.
Yes.
And Rosalind asks, did the challenges of your early life, those times of traumatic immigration, have they impacted your choice of profession?
Probably, definitely. That I felt that I had a range of experience and empathy that would allow me to walk into someone else's shoes. I'm paraphrasing again, To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, uh, and and feel comfortable. And also with the people who came to my office, I focus on the solution with them. I empathize with the pain, with the hurt, but I focus on the solution. How do we move from here? But yes, to answer the question, I think it's a progression. It's a progression, and also by having met so many people from so many different walks of life, from so many different nationalities, that I felt comfortable with those who came into my office. But definitely, um, somebody asked me, what would I be, what would I've done if, Cairo, Egypt would have remained the same as a few years prior to our departure. It's a hard fantasy for me. I can't even fantasize. All I can say is I would have been vastly different. How different, I can't tell. Yes, but certainly early
Uh-huh.
movement triggered that. Yes.
Very, very nice. So what aspects of Egyptian culture do you still carry with you and cherish the most?
Food. Egyptian food is delicious. And luckily, I have a friend of mine who, in New York, who's a master cook, and out of kindness, and she may be here now. And I'm giving a big hint to have. I'm having dinner at her place on Sunday, so I'm hinting for some Egyptian food on Sunday. The food, and also I have to say, people's kindness. People were very kind. They have a very good sense of humor. I remember with my mother walking in the streets of Cairo and encounter a poor guy sitting down with a loaf of bread and an onion. And that poor guy said, would you like some? Which is culturally, acceptable. And that is a memory that stays on. Um, Also, the beauty of Cairo. Cairo is a very beautiful city, at least the Cairo I've known. The view of the Nile and the pyramid is something unforgettable. And it carries a lot of symbolism that mastery endures. What is on the surface on the Nile and underneath the surface are two different things. And that translates absolutely with humans, with people, with situations. And as I've said before, the weather. But what I carry, maybe the humor sometimes, and also my name. My first name, Janan, means paradise. My last name, Natalie, means palm tree. So I am Janan Palm Tree, Paradise Palm Tree. So my friends from Egypt, and I think I have a couple here this evening, probably giggling, if not saying, what are you talking about? Well, I'm saying, those are facts about Egypt and who I am. And also, I think all the moves have made me multifaceted. I see things from a multifaceted perspective and feel comfortable with it. And I can, pull on one facet more than another, depending on the situation and depending on the person with whom I speak.
Thank you so much. You
Thank
know,
you.
you're welcome. Actually, in your book, you said growing up in Egypt, it's like, which is a traditional patriarchal society, right? So,
Yes.
how did that upbringing kind of shaped you understanding of freedom, identity, and womanhood in later in your life?
Well, it took me a long time. It was it was not overnight. There was, a culture again. My parents Catholic, so there was this upbringing. Catholic school, that was the other upbringing. Patriarchy, another upbringing. So one does not want to peel all of this because in each situation, even if it's not the best, it carries value, it carries tradition, and it carries history. But yes, it took me a long time. It took me a long time, and I was respectful of what my family, my background had instilled in me. Um, you know, being proper, being up to your word, being up to your standard, doing your best. And one thing that is culturally, and it was repeated to me quite often, and you'll see in the memoir, is keeping my chin up. No complaints allowed. No matter what, you move forward, you smile, and chin up. There are no other ways of behaving. So, and up to now, I do complain from time to time, but it's a rare event. And so usually it's to a kind ear who would be willing to listen. Um, yes, longer than I should have. And this is why when you ask me about my younger self, maybe she didn't dare do what she had in mind to do. Although there are little sparkles here and there. Not that I was oppressed by no stretch of the imagination, was I? My parents doted on me. But, I had integrated the nonverbal. And that's another thing with kids. The nonverbal, the behavior is often the greater lesson and what kids behave. Language reprimands, if you argue, you feel that you squared off. But the nonverbal, the way people in your family, in your life behave, this leaves a lasting imprint. And there were also circumstances because there's a decision, but the decision is never taken in isolation. The decision is taken in the middle of a context, of situations, of other things happening. And I was always very careful and still am not to carry more than I can. And maybe that limited my enthusiasm to do more earlier on. But once I spread my wings, no one could have stopped me. Once I made my decision.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't hear
thank
you.
you.
Sorry.
That was a good answer. Thank you so much for that. So you speak 4 languages. That's so amazing. How did you learn all those languages? And do you still speak in them?
Yes, French was the home language. Arabic was known. At school, it was bilingual, it was French and Arabic. Later on, I learned English by making a lot of errors. I have to confess, I never learned English formally. I learned English by practicing, by writing. But when I went to NYU and I said I wanted to learn English, they laughed at me. They said, "Are you kidding us? There's no learning to here." But I said, "Yes, I will like to learn. Give me lessons in the grammar and all of that." I never learned. I practice and I learn by trial and error and experience. Prepositions are still, I have to think up to now about which preposition is better than the other. Not the most common one, but the rare ones. Uh, so English I learned by speaking. Spanish, I took 2 semesters of Spanish at NYU, but before that, I learned Spanish through the patient I had at Columbia Presbyterian. At Columbia Presbyterian, most of the patients, I knew how to say, good evening and good day in Spanish, and I built the reputation unwarranted at the time of being a Spanish speaker. So I would start the session with a few words I knew. And if it was an evening session with a patient, all of a sudden I started speaking French. And rather than being offended, the patient, it brought us closer because they felt that, oh, the therapist too has issues. So we're not the only one with issues. So her issue is linguistic. So they would correct me very gently until finally I learned a little bit more and I went to NYU and learned Spanish more formally. But the real learning took place at Columbia Presbyterian and Spanish music. I'm very fond of Spanish music. So those are the 2 main ways I learned Spanish. But I practice. And with anyone who speaks Spanish, I would shift to Spanish.
Wow, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And there is a comment Fred made on the chat. It says, prepositions are the hardest in any language.
Oh, thank you. Very kind. I appreciate it. I will quote him back.
Yeah, that will
Yes.
change the sentence, meaning of the sentence. So
Yes,
yes, it does.
very much so. Very much so.
We just had the banned book week last month. So I would like to ask you a question. How do you think like book banning that can affect an author's creative freedom?
Well, it depends on the book. It depends on the topic. Uh, as a blanket answer, I would say freedom of speech, freedom of thought. But it depends to whom it is directed and the way it is explained. And it shouldn't be, sometimes in the hands of younger people, and it shouldn't be um, overtly offensive with the intent of offending. But it's very difficult to tease a line between what is should be banned and what, but theoretically, no. Practically, discretion, um, sensibility, good judgment. Uh, and there is a French saying that says, toute vérité n'est pas bonne à dire. All truth is not worth saying or clamoring. So, and it depends who says it. If it's an author who writes such things to gain, fame in any possible way, but I can't be more specific than that. I can't be more specific than that.
Thank you for that answer. And I have another question. I know a lot of people, and sometimes myself as well, deal with a lot of anxiety. So, do you have any simple advice for dealing with anxiety?
Again, it depends on the anxiety. Anxiety in itself is a good thing. It makes you think that there's something that needs to be addressed. But then if the anxiety becomes too elevated, one needs to have a dialogue. What am I afraid of? What is the likelihood of this thing happening? I can speak about myself. At some point early on, I was scared of flying, although it was the mode of transportation that I most frequently used from the get-go. But all of a sudden, maybe there was something happened to some airplane somewhere, and I read about it, and I got panicky about flying. And then I had this conversation. What am I flying? What are the statistics? Bring reason and bring possibilities. And what does anxiety bring to you? Was I, not wanting to go on that trip, and this is why the anxiety percolated? Or, one has to be very careful and analyze and use common judgment and common sense. But of course, there are different methods. If anxiety is based on an earlier experience of loss of control, I'm analyzing myself now, not being in control, like, the plane, not being controlled, not being in control of leaving my country of origin, of staying in Lebanon, of many other things that happened. It could explain that at some point I was a little bit reluctant, hesitant, quote unquote, anxious to fly. Luckily, I overcame it. But, I can trace it back. But I think the first approach is one of rationale and analyzing the pros and the cons and the possibilities, the likelihoods. But I would take anxiety as an alarm that something is off and take care.
Thank you. Well said. You know, I I would like to know if a young immigrant woman reads your book while
Yes.
struggling to find her own place. So, what is the one message you would want her to take away from your book?
I think adapt while maintaining your own values. Adapt to the place. It depends the reason why she came here. If she wanted to be here, she didn't want to be here. But adapt, learn about the country, get to know people around you, get to know people in your neighborhood, at school, at work. Talk with them. Don't be shy to go towards them. Welcome them in your life. Don't expect that people over here will have the same traditions and the same ways and the same values as you have. You have to adjust, and you also have to introduce them in due time about your country of origin and what led you to come. But I think gratefulness is a prerequisite, because one would hope one is welcomed. One is find its place in the society, find its his or her own place among peers. I know immigration is a hot topic, but I won't go into that realm. Hot topic nowadays. But there are immigrants and immigrants. But regardless of the kind of immigrants, quote unquote, we are all human beings with our joy and our sorrow. And again, if we're here, it's for a reason.
Great. Thank you so much. You know, I was wondering after you published your book, have how have the readers' responses surprised? Is there any way they surprise you? The readers' comments or any?
I'm grateful to my readers. For the most part, they were very supportive. For the most part, they all mentioned courage. They mentioned resilience. I realized about resilience, I was less focused on courage. Um, they also mentioned the change and the reinvention. The change was really a question of evolving, adapting, getting better. At least I would hope so. And moving forward. It's very important to move forward. Staying still is yes, but it doesn't provide the evolution. And if we speak from an evolutionary perspective, each day we can do something better for ourselves. Recently, uh, someone told me, and I integrated it. If I didn't exercise for half an hour, it was a waste of time. But then I realized that if I exercise 5 minutes, it's better than 0 minute. So that applies to all aspects of life. Exercising, being kind. Being kind is free. Being kind doesn't mean being without boundaries, but saying a nice word, or smiling to someone is a big deal, can be a big deal. So, yes, moving forward, reading a book, talking to a friend over the phone, those gestures, allow us to progress. Working harder. So,
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It is after 7, so we're gonna finish up soon. So now that you finished this book, are you working on any new writing projects? What do you have next in store for you? Or are you gonna move to any more continents?
no, I'm done with continent. I'm in New York. I'm here. I'm saying, um, I translated the book, as I've said, in French. I will work next on the audio. I have a couple of ideas about papers, but I doubt it's going to be a book. But I think about an essay or two that I have in mind. But I'll finish the translations first, and the audio, and then I will think about further writing. I loved writing. I had practiced writing in different realms. I wrote research paper, I wrote my dissertation, I wrote my divorce settlement. So I did different kind of writing before, and I wrote many, many, many psychological reports. But this was different. It was new. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I did. Thank you. Thank you, Queens Public Library, Casper, Indira,
Yeah, thank you.
Rosalind.
It was great having you. It was a real pleasure talking with you. I hope we can have you back again. And for everybody here in the audience, you're welcome to join us next week, October 30th, from 6 to 7, when we have Annalise Chen, author of Clam Down. She'll be our author next week. And thank you again. We're so happy to have you, Janan. And thank you, Indira. It was a great talk, and we really appreciate
Thank you.
having you.
I would love to
Thank you,
come back.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Janan. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
We weren't too noisy. Carter was talking and talking.